Hi, Kate. How are you? I'm well, Matthew. And yourself? Can't complain. That's great, Matthew. Say, have you heard they're cloning babies out in Texas? I have, Kate. Very grave stuff, that. Oh, I agree. We're standing at the precipice of that great murky future, where man has forgotten his place on this unforgiving planet. Very true, Kate. Alright, name everything wrong with that dialogue. That's right. That dialogue was cliché and meandering with an over-reliance on character names. Alright, I'm done doing that children's cartoon host type of thing. That was creepy. But in reality, I bet that even if you couldn't tell what precisely was wrong with that dialogue, minus the acting, because we're talking about writing here, okay, fellas, you would definitely agree that it wasn't working. There was something awkward and unnatural about it. You see, the reason we know that is because we spend our entire lives surrounded by story. So much so that we are innately familiar with when writing sounds off. Even if we can't say why. You would think that by hearing so much dialogue throughout our lives, it would make it the easiest thing to write. But actually the opposite is true. Dialogue is one of, if not the hardest part of writing. If you ask, 10 writers, 8 out of 10 of them will say dialogue is the hardest thing for them to write. I'm not really sure why that is, but I'm going to show you 5 dialogue mistakes that most writers make during their first draft, and potentially future drafts. Are you ready? Mistake number 1. Relying on subtlety without sufficient grounding. Hang in there, I will explain. Hey Connor, are you going to the party tonight? Nah, probably not. Yeah, they're usually pretty boring. Not much of a partier then, eh, Sally? No, I prefer small groups. Same. Now see? Did you catch how Sally is hopelessly in love with Connor, but he can never be with her because he's still grieving the loss of his last girlfriend who died tragically during a piñata accident at a party? But no, of course you didn't see that, because there was no context. There was just people talking. It was not dripping with conflict that you thought it was, because we, the reader, were not let in to the true motivations of each character. It is something that only you, the author, knew. Maybe Connor is just distracted a little bit, or maybe he's a man of few words. Maybe Sally is a people pleaser, who just goes along with what other people say in order to fit in, no matter who she's talking to. You see, this is a tricky one. But I must admit that this is also my most common dialogue mistake. Subtlety is important, and I always have grasped that. When I was in college, my professors would always say, never have the characters say exactly what they mean, because people in real life never just spout out exactly what they mean. And I took that very, very literally, that every line of dialogue must be dripping with subtext. And in theory, that could work and make for some very tense, gripping dialogue scenes. But in reality, I was never giving my subtext an anchor point. Meaning, the thing that the characters were talking around, the elephant in the room, was not always known to the reader, or not usually known to the reader. It would only be known to me, because I felt like if I told the reader what the elephant in the room was, then that would be just killing the point of the subtext. Not realizing that they needed to be grounded in some sort of reality for these characters in order for them to understand that there even was an elephant in the room. So then, in all my dialogue scenes, there's no way anyone would be able to detect or understand the context of the conversation. It would all just feel meandering and unnecessary. So, when you're writing dialogue where the characters aren't saying exactly what they mean, make sure your reader has some anchor point to draw from, so that they can kind of figure out what the characters mean. The reader needs to be at least vaguely aware of what the elephant in the room is. Mistake number 2. Starting your dialogue too early. Good morning, Sarah. Morning, Tom. I see traffic's backed up again. Yep, they finally started building that bridge they were talking about. I wonder how long it'll take them to finish it. Who knows, probably all summer. Do you want some coffee? Sure. Great, it's decaf. Blech, never mind then, I hate that stuff. I thought you were supposed to be watching your heart. I'll be fine, they worry too much about these things these days. And now, the writer is patting himself on the back for showing the audience that Sarah doesn't prioritize her health or listen to her doctor. And that was shown rather than told. But, my friend, as the infomercials would say, there's gotta be a better way. In a commendable attempt at realism, many new writers include way too much monotonous, meandering pleasantries between their characters. We don't need to see the small talk, folks. Dialogue is supposed to be a tool that can speed up the pacing of your novel. It is not supposed to feel like it drags on forever, with no purpose. Each section of dialogue needs to have a purpose. And once you've identified that purpose, be it gaining information, establishing character, anything, any kind of purpose, you need to start the conversation there. And the reader can just assume that the characters greeted each other in some way. All the pleasant build-up of hi, how are you, isn't necessary. It's actually boring. Just get in and get out. People don't even like small talk in real life, so we definitely don't want to be reading about it in a book. The exception to this is when there is some known extreme source of tension that one or both of the characters are actively ignoring by engaging in pleasantries. But the audience has to be in on it too, like a bomb strapped beneath the table. Then that small talk will be rife with tension. But if you're only having characters converse so that a new piece of information can be learned, skip everything that isn't related to that new piece of information. Just get in and get out. Mistake number 3. No one talks over each other. I can't believe you yelled at my mom. I was tired of being bossed around by her. She was your boss. Yes, she was, and I quit. I should have never taken that job in the first place. She only gave me that job because she thought I was too poor for you. Well, I'm going back to her house right now and telling her that you're sorry and that you're taking your job back. You are not. Do you see the problem? All your characters are perfect little listeners, always allowing the other person to get their point across before they start speaking again, even when in the middle of a heated argument. But you need to remember that every time someone speaks in your novel, time is passing. And in the heat of the moment like this, it feels strange for no one to try to shout over the other. You're just letting someone monologue in their face before precisely responding to what that person said, rather than only trying to get their own point across without really listening, how real people argue. In real arguments, people are always just spouting out their thoughts. They're not listening closely to what the other person says, giving them their time to finish speaking, and then responding to what they say. And it can be really hard to capture that feeling of realism without making your dialogue hideously confusing for the reader. I'm good luck. Little quick tip though, for more realistic dialogue, start topics and then drop them. Ask questions that don't get answered. Most people don't speak as if they're filling out an exam. They pick and choose what to respond to in order to achieve their own point. They don't take the time to precisely answer every question that is posed to them. Mistake number 4. Everyone sounds the same. I'm scared to go home. Don't worry, I'll protect you. What if my brother doesn't understand our relationship? He will, or he'll have to go through me to break us up. I'm so glad I met you. Anything for you, my love. The problem here is that both of these speakers are extremely frank and to the point. It feels unnatural and also overly familiar, because the tornado siren. Can you hear it? Hopefully that's just a test, because I don't want to have to finish this video in the basement. Can you hear it? I mean, can I just talk over the tornado siren? I'm gonna try. So the reason it's overly familiar is because it's something we've often encountered in weakly written works. And a lot of times this can happen because the writer is basing their dialogue off of preconceived tropes rather than off specific people, like specific characters that they have created into people. For example, an emotional woman and her protective lover. The writer isn't considering how their unique characters would respond to a situation like this, but only how people might respond in general. And that gets boring really fast. It can also feel lazy. Instead, maybe try having one character show their anxiety without verbalizing it, and then, depending on the personality of the other character, he might try to soothe her with inappropriate jokes, or distract her by bringing up some other topic. Two people rarely state their feelings so frankly in a conversation, even with someone they're close to. And even if they did, it doesn't make for very interesting dialogue. This type of dialogue where all the characters sound the same can also happen because the writer was trying to make the characters sound like them, like themselves, the writer. Usually because it's easier to capture the way that you speak in a realistic manner, more so than it is to capture the way other people might speak in a realistic manner. You know? Or this can be a problem that only affects the character's sense of humor. For some reason, a lot of times, all the characters, even if they have distinct voices, will all always have the same snarky sense of humor. That just so happens to be popular in publishing right now. Dialogue can, and should be, a tool that you use to differentiate your characters, and help them stand out in your reader's mind. Maybe one character always talks over herself, never finishing her sentences to show that she's always worked up and in a tizzy all the time. Maybe one grunts monosyllabic? One-syllable words to every question, no matter the situation. Maybe one is always overly gracious, trying to lessen the tension in the room no matter what, or tending to other characters' needs before their own, even to the point of annoying the other characters. Maybe one character's always spouting off little jabs or complaints, but in a good-natured tone so that no one calls him out on his bullying. You know, there's just distinct voices in dialogue. Quick little writing tip for you. If your dialogue starts to sound overly familiar, that's a good indication that something is off. Either you're relying on cliches or tropes to craft your dialogue, or you're meandering through small talk. If it sounds familiar, you should rewrite it. Which brings me to mistake number 5. You have boring topics of conversation. This isn't the same as small talk, but you will hear. It's just boring. Bye, Mom, I'm going to school. Don't forget your lunch. I'm buying today. I've got my birthday money. Sounds good. Have a good day. I will. See you at 4. I love you, sweetie. Now, you might think that this type of conversation establishes character by showing these two characters' relationship. But in reality, it is completely boring. And it doesn't actually establish anything. It's just familiar topic of conversation. Maybe the characters are being polite to each other just to avoid a fight. Maybe they're acting out this familiar scene out of a sense of duty rather than any actual warmth. We don't know. There is no way for us to know just from that little bit of conversation because it's a boring topic. Overly familiar. Sounds like the type of conversation you would write if some teacher was like, all right, class, you've got 5 minutes to write me a conversation between a mother and their child. Go. This type of dialogue is especially common at the beginnings of novels, before the inciting incident has happened and we're just getting to know the world and the characters and the story. But that is a problem, because this is one of the most boring dialogue mistakes that you can make. So you definitely don't want to be making it at the start of your novel, when you're trying to get people hooked. We don't want to be hearing these generic conversations, that we could just dream up on our own at any given moment. Even in the character's everyday world, you need to be picking unique, specific topics for them to talk about. That is the key.